Hi everyone. So, I'm going to be talking about the UK context. So I'll start in 2010. So in 2010, we had many years of a Labour government. And in that Labour government, towards the end of it, the financial crisis happened. And in the 2010 general election, we were very surprised we weren't surprised actually, when a Conservative government, we thought a Conservative government was going to get in. But instead, what we had was a hung parliament. So we had a coalition government of the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats coming together, which was a very strange and unusual situation. What that led to, you might think that, okay, we have the Conservatives, perhaps the Liberal Democrats might water them down a little bit and, maybe soften them a little bit. We didn't have that. The reality actually was huge cuts and high austerity, failing wages, stagnation, etc. So when 2015 came along, the next general election, there was high hopes in civil society and across activists that we were going to get the Labour Party back in government. Every single polling showed a majority Labour government. But the reality was, in that May 2015, was we did not have a Labour government returned. We had a majority Conservative government. That was a huge shock to me, to everybody, because everything, polls, the conversation, etc., said that there will be a Labour government. So we weren't mentally prepared, we weren't organisationally prepared to receive another Conservative government, another 5 years of Conservative government. But there was one little hope in that moment. And the hope was that perhaps we can have a conversation in the country. A conversation about austerity, a conversation about cuts, and the real damages that is causing to everyday people. And the way in which we thought that, because that didn't happen during the general election, during that campaign, it didn't happen because the belief was the Labour Party was going to win. And that would naturally make the change. So in 2015, when that didn't happen, we had one hope, and that hope almost happened accidentally. And it was a man called Jeremy Corbyn, a member of Parliament for the Labour Party. He said we pushed him and prodded, and he agreed to stand for leadership, to stand to be the leader of the Labour Party in opposition. And really, the truth was, we didn't think he would win to be leader of the Labour Party, at 0% chance for him to win. But what we thought is, he will be around the country for 3 months, he will hold big meetings, he will get some media, and perhaps there will be a little bit of filtering of anti-austerity, anti-cuts, and a different way of looking at the country. That was our aim, for him to just get around the country, get a few 2 minutes, those 2-minute clips on the news that they give the opposition? At least in the UK, they have to give 2 minutes to the opposition. If the Prime Minister spoke, they have to give 2 minutes to the opposition. We thought, let's get that. But what actually ended up happening was it ended up being an amazing summer, an amazing, unbelievable summer, because Jeremy Corbyn ended up winning the leadership election to be the leader of the Labour Party. And in that summer, we ended up having a mass number of people joining the Labour Party, a mass enthusiasm joining, and the doubling, tripling, quadrupling of Labour membership. And those people were not the ordinary, perhaps, I don't know how it is here in normal meetings, but in the UK, if you go to an activist meeting, it tends to be very white, it tends to be very old, and it tends to be very male. The people joining, the people enthused by Jeremy standing, were not that category of people. They were young, they were ethnically diverse, they were diverse across the country, there was large numbers of women, and lots of people that have never been involved in political parties or never been even involved in activism generally. Those were the people. So when Jeremy won, what we did was, we didn't want to lose that to the Labour Party machinery. Because the Labour Party is old and stale, and actually, very much, they say that they're a socialist democratic party, but actually the reality is they are old and stale and boring, and you know, for them activism means go knock on that door and tell them to vote Labour. Go talk to somebody on the phone and tell them to vote Labour. There's no conversation, there's no interest, there's no two-way. It's just, this is what we stand for, vote for us. So we didn't want that to happen. We didn't want to lose that group of people that have just joined. So what we started was an organization called Momentum. And Momentum's aim was to elect a Labour government with a transformative socialist program and to extend democracy within the Labour Party, and to link up and strengthen relationships between trade unionists, civil society, grassroots organizations that wouldn't necessarily look at the Labour Party, but for them to come through Momentum for that conversation to start. And Momentum itself, once it's set up, did several different things. So from football clubs in local groups, to mutual aid groups, to political education. Once Momentum actually started and it set up lots of local groups, what the local groups decided to focus on really, really varied. And Momentum's role ended up being very vital once we had general elections. So with general elections, we've had two in 2 years. So in 2016 we had a general election, and in 2017 we had a general election, and then 2019 we had a general election. And both those general elections, the main conversation and the whole reasons behind it was Brexit, Britain deciding to leave the European Union. And if I now go back to those elections, it was very difficult actually to have any conversation about policy, about the standards of living, about how people's lives are being affected by these policies and so on. Because the only conversation is, we're leaving the EU, can there be another referendum about it? What does it mean to leave the EU? You know, what are the details of it? In that period, since 2015 and since 2016 when we had the referendum and so on, we've had 5 prime ministers. One of them lasted for 50 days. And that's sort of the setup of that context of where we are at. Now, going back to Momentum and how they were useful in the general elections. We had, when the 2017 general election was called and the 2019 general election was called, Momentum just became a power force in supporting the Labour Party from the outside, because actually Momentum now built relationships and it was able to connect with so many different grassroots organizations and civil society that the Labour Party was not able to talk to. So that they ended up being the vehicle of communication, almost being like an outside force of communication, and so on. And in terms of the goals that Momentum had during the general elections, there were 3 main ones. So one was to broadcast our own messages and change the narrative of the country. And I'll give you a little bit of how that happened. Secondly, it was to increase the ground activism of activists. And the third one was to make movement building more accessible for people. So in terms of how we did that and how we took that forward, one of the things that we did, and it was good that you started with internationalism and so on, Momentum worked a lot with the Bernie Sanders campaign in America that worked in 2016. Actually, we worked a lot with their organizers. And one of the big ideas that they had that really infused, because it was a campaign like no other really, we haven't really seen that kind of campaigning and that kind of tactics before. And one of the big ideas that they use is the concept of big organizing. And I don't know how familiar we are here, but I'm happy to talk a little bit more about it later, perhaps. But the idea of big organizing, is this idea of embedding organizational systems which enable volunteers to participate in unprecedented scale. So it's really you doing it up, nothing like the norm. So if in the UK, for example, when they talk about political activism, what they mean is they will give you a clipboard of who is in the voter registration, and the Labour Party will then tell you, this is your street, go knock on the doors, and all you do is, hi, I'm from the Labour Party, will you be voting Labour next week? And that is as far as it goes. So with some of the things that we adopted that were trying to break that, is trying to make that kind of activism slightly different, but also enabling people to have bigger and better conversations. So things like, we would hold training programs to actually say, what are the on-door conversations that you might have? How might you have it? Doing scripts for those kind of conversations and training people for those kind of conversations. Literally doing things like a mini sort of acting sessions in front of each other with groups and so on. The other thing that we really did was use technology and use literally one of the best websites we created was called My Nearest Marginal. So it was a website that you can just put in, which is your nearest marginal that you should really focus your campaigning on. That cost us £30 to set up, but it had 100,000 hits, and that's thousands of activists using it. One of the things that website did as well was ask people to pledge that they will take the day of the election off and they will campaign on the day of the election. So that we had 10,000 people saying that they would do that. And you can imagine the number of people and the number of doors that they were knocked. We think about 1 to 2 million doors would have been knocked by using our app. Another thing was in the UK, students who are in universities are allowed to choose which seat that they can vote on, either at the university seat or their home seat. So they have 2 addresses, they're allowed. The other site that we did, which was dedicating and targeting students, was called My Uni Vote. So again, they decided where to vote to make it strategic. So they didn't just vote at the university if it was like a strong Labour seat, if their home seat was perhaps a marginal. So it's that kind of tactical voting that was beginning to be embedded into people's way of working. The third thing that we tried to do, again, another app, was called Call for Corbyn app. And the idea of that was we asked people to host in their own homes or in their local community centres, etc., little pop-up parties. So you and your few friends can have dinner together, etc. You might have a barbecue, you might, whatever you want to do, watch a film, and then just set aside half an hour of calling people, voters, together and making it a communal thing, calling voters and asking, having that conversation, asking for their support, etc. And that changed the dynamic of it being you having to leave your home. It was accessible to perhaps disabled people, older people, etc. All sorts of different mothers or people with other responsibilities, etc. So those are just few of the different things that we decided to use in terms of technology. And then the final thing that we really concentrated on was around that messaging. And in terms of messaging, again, politics, we had a lot of conversation in the UK about apathy and like people not being interested in politics, etc. And we showed through how the way in which people got infused by Jeremy Corbyn's election and also by people joining Momentum, that wasn't necessarily true. But actually is what you say to people, what you offer them, and how you engage with them, and the communication that you have with them. So one of the things that we did was, again, via viral videos, we did similar-ish to what you mentioned. We did buy some, but not too many. But what we actually did more was do our own in-house videos. And it wasn't just videos saying, you should vote with it, this is what we think about housing, you should do this. We did different things depending on which context that we wanted to put it through. So sometimes we did like funny sketches that you would think, oh, this looks silly, what is it about? But actually, we were putting it through, so we used some like actors and so on. The other thing so we did lots of types of videos, but also lots of different alternative voices that you wouldn't necessarily hear talking about politics, which I think is really important. So different faces, new faces, fresh faces, etc. Not the same old stale male pale that we have in the UK. So that was a really important thing. And some of the successes around that is overall successes was that we had nearly, I already mentioned, 10,000 pledges to take a day off work. We had more than 100,000 people use My Nearest Marginal website. We had 400,000 young people also contacted via WhatsApp, which was amazing. And Momentum targeted 30 constituencies. And out of the 30 constituencies, we won all of them but 5, which was another really amazing moment. And in terms of the social media element, we've had 8 million hits, and at one point we had 1 in 3 Facebook users in the UK seeing some of our content. So that is really targeted, really defined, different types of videos and so on. So that's, and in terms of lessons we learnt, I already talked about the lessons around using different voices, different people, voices, etc., being really important. And people wanting to hear stories that is not just, isn't it depressing that our health service is falling apart? Actually, people want to know when they use the NHS, what does that mean to them, how the health service works for them, and what they would like to see from it. Like flipping the script of just saying it's falling apart. Other things that we talked about is actually also not being afraid to be bold and radical in your manifesto. Because I think another thing in the UK that has happened for many years is that we'll have watered down manifestos, and then internally it'll be like, but when we get in government, we will do it better. Which never happens, right? And yeah, and just, yeah, I think I could talk about lots of other things. And also that it is possible to engage with voices and people that don't necessarily get into politics. It's on us, it's not on them to be engaged, and I think we need to do the work and think differently from the way in which we do politics and how we communicate with people. I'll leave it at that.